Hi there, it's Mrs. Scales, and I'm here to teach you about pedigrees today. Now, a pedigree, you may have heard that word when it comes to like dog food or cat food or something like that, but a pedigree is actually just a family tree that shows genetic history. So, you do have a document of notes to fill out with this that will ask you questions from the video. So make sure you have this pulled up to the side and make sure you type up your answers into that document while I'm going over this with you. So a pedigree, if you'll look over here on my paper, is a chart that shows genetic history of a family over several generations. So it's really good to show patterns to see if there's any genetic diseases that run maybe in somebody's family. For instance, a big genetic disease that you may have heard about is sickle cell. Sickle cell is genetic and it affects your red blood cells. Well, some doctors and genetic counselors can create a pedigree to show how sickle cell runs in the family, so it gives them a better knowledge of the family genetics. So to make a pedigree, there's some symbols that you use. The first symbol is a circle, and the circle represents females in the pedigree. The other symbol is a square, and that's what you use to represent the males. Now, since we're showing family history, we have to be able to show when somebody gets married and when people have children with one another, because that's part of your family history. So to draw people that have been married and have kids together, you draw a circle and a square with a line drawn together. And you draw it just like how I did right here on my paper. So for married couples, you draw them together, you connect them with just a line. Now, if you want to show children of those two people, you draw a line going down. And depending on how many kids are in the family, you draw that many spaces. So you will draw kind of like this bracket here. We're going to say that this family has 3 kids. So you draw a bracket with lines going down so that you have space for those 3 kids there. Now, let's say that this family has 2 girls and a boy. So what you draw now, you draw a circle. Let's say the boy is the middle child, and then you draw a circle for the other girl. She's the youngest. So here's an example of a family pedigree. Again, these 2 people are married. So we're just put that in parentheses here so you can see that. And these people down here, that's their children and their siblings to one another, their brother and sisters. All right, so the next thing that you could do for pedigrees, again, this is to show genetic diseases and how they pass along in families. So to be able to show a genetic disease, what you do is you take either the circle or the square and you shade it in to show that that person is affected. So you do the same thing for the males. You shade in the square, and this shows that they are affected as well. And the disease can be any genetic trait that somebody could be born with. Like a big one that we could use this for is sickle cell, like I mentioned earlier, but you can use this for other genetic diseases. Sometimes even family do these for maybe like diabetes or cancer to show who has gotten cancer in the family, to see how that has spread genetically. Okay, now if you want to show, for example, multiple generations, we're going to make another pedigree here. You can draw this along with me if you want. So we're going to first start off with a married couple like how we did before. And this time we're going to say they have 2 kids, a girl and a boy. This is the first generation of parents, and these are their children. So what we do here to show multiple generations, we put a Roman numeral off to the side. We use the symbol for 1 to show the first generation. Now, the ones below it is the next generation, and this is the second one. So you use a number 2. Now, let's say these kids grow up and become old enough to where they can have their own kids and get married as well. So let's say that the boy that they have here, he got married and he has had 1 child, which is also a boy. So what we did here, we drew a square connected to a circle, and then we drew the square coming down to represent the child. So now, since we have a kid down here for them, we now have a third generation. So we're going to use Roman numeral 3 over here off to the side. Now, sometimes it gets a little confusing because families can be really big. So what we do after we put the Roman numerals, we put numbers underneath each circle and square. We always start with number 1 for the first one, number 2. When you get down to the new generation, so like down here for the second one, we start the numbers over again. So this would be 1, 2, and 3. And then down here, since we only have 1 person in the third generation, we put just a 1 here. So now we could be able to tell, like if we want to communicate with other people, which person in the family that they're talking about. And the way that we do that is we can say Roman numeral 1, or you can just call it 1, 0.1, and let's say 1.2. Let's say you're given a practice problem where you have to find the relationship between 1.1 and 1.2. Now you know who in the family to look at. So we already talked about this. These 2 people here, they are married to one another, so they are spouses. They're husband and wife. Okay, so for the next one, we're going to do 2.1 and 1.2. So 2.1 is right here, so this circle, and 1.2 is this square up here. So now we got to find the relationship between those 2 people. Well, since they're connected this way, and this circle comes down from this square, this would be the daughter, and that person above her like that is her father. And because it's a square, we know it's the father, not the mother. Okay, for the next practice, we want to find the relationship between 3.1, which is the square down here, and 1.1. So we're looking at these 2 now. All right, so you probably already guessed it, but the way that you do this is you say, okay, well, I know this is a square because it's a boy, or it's a boy because it's a square. And I know these are his parents. That's his father. And then that's his father's mother. So that is his grandmother. So it is a grandson down here and a grandmother. All right, so that's how you can find relationships in the pedigree. Now, another thing in pedigrees that we also have is we have other symbols. For example, I'm going to add some stuff to our pedigree here. Let's say this girl, she's shaded in, and this boy down here, he's shaded in. Whenever you shade them in like this, that means that they are affected with some kind of genetic disease. And let's just say the genetic disease for this particular one is a disease called cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease of the lungs. And what happens, it produces a very thick mucus inside the lungs, and it makes it really hard to breathe. And again, it's something that they're born with. They can't control it. So you either get the gene for it or you don't get the gene for it. All right. So another symbol that we can use is you can also cross out people when they pass away. So I'm actually going to do that. I know this sounds a little morbid to say that, but it is something that you do need to be able to read from a pedigree. So let's say that this lady here, when you cross it out like that, that means that they have passed away. All right. Now, whenever you have, let's look down here at this particular family. Whenever you have a disease like cystic fibrosis show up in the children, but not in the parents, like you can see here, then that shows that most likely this disease right here is going to be recessive. And what that means is basically the gene can hide and it can skip generations as well. That is the only way possible for this family that it can show up unless it was some kind of random mutation. And it come to find out, cystic fibrosis is recessive in families. So what that means is if you think back to our Punnett squares and our genotypes, for somebody that has the disease, they would have 2 lowercase letters, which means they carry the recessive alleles. And for that to show, they have to have 2 of them. Now, for parents that are normal and but they do have a disease gene that they gave to their children, like in these 2 parents, the only way possible that could be is if they're carriers for it. A carrier is somebody that is completely normal, that does not show the trait, but they have the allele or the gene for the trait. So again, they carry it, but they're normal. So for like these 2 people here, the 2 parents, they are carriers. So the way that we would write their alleles, we would use 1 dominant and 1 recessive. And now we know, since that their child has cystic fibrosis, that they each carry the allele for it, and that's how it was passed on to their son. So if you look back at this diagram up here and their child here, you can figure out here that these 2 parents are also carriers as well. That is how this girl got it as well. So they're carriers, and it just happened to be that this son right here, that he also married a lady who was a carrier, and they had the son with cystic fibrosis. So again, carriers mean that you have the disease, but you do not show it. All right, so that is my presentation on pedigrees. If you want to practice, you can start by trying to make your own family pedigree. Just start with like your immediate family, and you would just draw out circles and squares to represent your mother, your father, and you and your siblings. And you draw it in the same way that we did here. All right, if you have any questions, please let me know. Bye.